I never imagined a day would come when the sound of wedding bells would feel like a knife twisting slowly beneath my ribs, but that's exactly what happened the moment I opened Jennifer's wedding invitation list and saw 200 carefully selected names: friends, co-workers, distant cousins, people she barely knew. But not mine. Not her father. Not the man who raised her alone from the time she was barely tall enough to hold my hand barely above her waist. Not the man who worked double shifts, slept in his truck, and skipped meals just to make sure she never felt the hunger, fear, or abandonment that I lived through growing up. And as I stared at that list, at all those names stacked neatly like a roster of people she apparently valued more than me, my heartbeat slowed until it felt like my chest had turned to stone, like the world around me had muted itself just to force me to sit in the suffocating silence of that betrayal. And I swear the room seemed to tilt, the air thinning into something sharp and metallic as the realization sank in that my own daughter, my Jennifer, was ashamed of me, ashamed of the man who once carried her on his shoulders through stormy nights and hospital hallways and courtroom battles and school recitals, ashamed enough to erase me from the most important day of her life. Not because I hurt her, not because I was dangerous or cruel, but because I wasn't financially appropriate for the image she wanted to project, and the words she used, God, those words still echo like broken glass in my mind. Dad, it's just that you don't fit the aesthetic. A phrase so cold and rehearsed it felt like she had practiced in the mirror just to make sure it landed like a bullet right between my ribs. And I remember standing there with my hands shaking, not from anger yet, but from the deep, unbearable ache you feel when someone you love twists the truth into something ugly and uses it to cut you open. Of raising her, and in that moment, every tiny, memory, hopeful, innocent Jennifer who used to draw pictures of us as superheroes, who used to say, Daddy, you're the strongest man in the world. And I wondered when exactly that little girl had disappeared, when she had been replaced by someone who measured love in money, who weighed her father's worth against wedding decor and Instagram aesthetics and found him lacking. And the pain that crawled up my throat was so raw I had to sit down just to breathe, because it wasn't just the rejection, it was the erasure, the rewriting of our entire history into something disposable, something she could discard without blinking. And as I sat there on the edge of my bed, staring at work boots with holes in them and hands scarred from decades of labor she never bothered to understand, I felt this heavy, slow, simmering dark settle behind my ribs, not the fiery rage people talk about, not the kind that makes you scream, but a quieter, colder fury that freezes the heart instead of igniting it. And I knew that if I didn't confront this, if I didn't look her in the eyes and make her understand what she had done, not just to me, but to herself, then I would carry this wound forever. And so I made my decision not in anger, but in something far deeper, more controlled, more unshakable, the kind of decision a man makes when he finally sees the truth with brutal clarity. And that truth was simple. I was done being small for people who benefited from my smallness. I was done being erased. I was done letting shame be something other people handed to me like a gift I was expected to hold. So the next morning, before the sun even thought about rising, I called an old friend, a pilot I once helped when he had nothing, a man whose loyalty wasn't based on money or appearances, but on the real stuff: character, sacrifice, humanity. And I asked him a question. How dramatic would it be if a father arrived at his daughter's wedding in a helicopter? But when I said nothing, when he heard the hollow ache in my voice, the humor drained and he said, Tell me the time and place. And so the plan was set with a simple, steady certainty, not born of revenge for spectacle's sake, but born of a need for Jennifer to see, really see, the weight of what she had done. And as the days crawled toward the wedding, I spent a lot of time alone, not brooding exactly, but reflecting, replaying every moment from her childhood, the scraped knees, the nights she couldn't sleep and curled against me, the times I skipped paying my electric bill just to afford her school trip, the morning I sold my father's watch so she could buy a prom dress that made her feel beautiful. And I wondered where that love had gone, how it had been replaced by embarrassment, entitlement, and hollow validation. And as painful as it was, there was a quiet part of me that understood. Sometimes we love our children so fiercely, so blindly, that we accidentally raise them to believe that the world should love them the same way, unconditionally. and in shielding them from hardship, we create adults who cannot fathom the weight of sacrifice, adults who forget the hands that built their foundation, and that realization hurt more than any rejection ever could. But it also steeled something inside me, and when the wedding day finally arrived, when the sky split open into a brilliant, merciless blue, and the helicopter blades began to whirl into thunder above my head, I felt a calm settle over me. Not confidence, not pride, but a dark, heavy calm that grows from finally accepting a tragic truth, and as we lifted into the air, the entire city shrinking beneath us, the sound of those blades drowned out the last remnants of doubt clinging to my chest. That probably cost more than my truck. By the time we approached the vineyard where her wedding was being held, her with its tall white tents and rows of posing for photos and guests sipping champagne, and not a single one of them knew who I was. Not a single one looked up expecting me, because I was never supposed to exist in this world she built. And when the helicopter descended, sending petals and tablecloths flying like startled birds, the crowd scattered in confusion, shielding their faces, dresses whipping in the wind, and as the door opened and I stepped out onto the grass, the noise fell into a stunned, suffocating silence, the kind of silence that presses into your ears and slows time to a crawl. And there, at the end of the aisle, Jennifer turned, her face blanching first with shock, then with dread, then with a shame so sharp I could see it slice straight through her carefully constructed imaginary world, and for the first time in years, she saw me. Not the version she wanted to hide, not the man she deemed unworthy, but her father, the one person who had never abandoned her, standing uninvited at the altar she tried to keep me from, and she stumbled toward me, her voice trembling. "Dad, what are you doing?" And I looked at her, really looked, and in my slow, dark, steady voice I said, "I came to see the woman you've become," and those words cracked something open in her because she knew exactly what I meant. And as whispers rippled through the crowd, and her fiancé's parents exchanged disapproving glances, and the officiant cleared his throat awkwardly, Jennifer's facade began to crumble, tears welling in her perfect, meticulously styled eyes, and she whispered, "Dad, please, you're embarrassing me." And that was the moment, those 6 words, that detonated the truth at the heart of this entire nightmare, because embarrassment had trumped love, appearance had replaced loyalty, anger twisting across his face, every ounce of gratitude. And he said loud enough for the front rows to hear. And before I could told you this would happen, before I could even cracked the entire day in half, because that meant he knew I was discussed, dismissed, judged, excluded. And something in Jennifer's expression collapsed as if she realized for the first time that she had traded her father for people who didn't respect her, people who mocked her behind closed doors, people who saw her as a project, not a partner. And in that brutal, raw moment, truth cut her deeper than I ever could have, and she broke, right there in front of everyone, sobbing, not the small, embarrassed tears of someone caught in a lie, but the guttural, collapsing sobs of someone who suddenly sees the full weight of their choices crushing them, and the wedding unraveled faster than anyone could recover it. Arguments erupted. Guests whispered. The groom's family demanded explanations. Jennifer fled toward the dressing tent, her friends chasing after her, and within 15 minutes, the elegant, polished dream wedding she excluded me from disintegrated into chaos, so complete that even the planners gave up trying to salvage it. And as I stood there quietly, hands clasped behind my back, the same way I used to stand outside her kindergarten classroom waiting to pick her up, I felt no joy in her pain, no triumph, no vindictive satisfaction. Because this wasn't the revenge people fantasize about. It was a tragedy, a slow, dark unraveling born from her own choices, and all I felt was a deep, tired sadness mixed with a faint, hollow ache of closure, because she finally saw me. Not for the spectacle, not for the helicopter, but for the truth she had spent years avoiding. And as I turned to leave, the only sound in my ears was the distant thud of the helicopter blades beginning to spin again, and just as I stepped toward it, I heard her voice behind me. And small, those words, broken, those quiet, trembling, desperate words, finally carried the weight of the love she forgot she had, and I paused, not turning around, because I knew if I saw her face I might break too, and in that low, dark voice of mine I said, "Jennifer, love built this family, not money," and then I stepped into the helicopter, leaving the wreckage of her choices behind, not as punishment, not as revenge, but as a mirror she would have to face long after the dust settled. And as we lifted into the sky, the vineyard shrinking below, I realized that sometimes life forces us to walk through darkness, not to destroy us, but to reveal the truth about the people we've poured ourselves into. And though the ache never fully leaves, neither does the clarity, and in that clarity, I finally understood that love cannot survive where shame lives. And that was the day I stopped chasing people who were only running from their own reflection, and began, for the first time in years, to choose peace over pain. And yet, as the helicopter carried me farther from the vineyard, from the ruined wedding and the shattered illusions scattered across its manicured lawns, I found myself staring out at the vast stretch of landscape beneath us, thinking about how fragile the bond between parent and child can be, how quickly it can be fractured when pride, ego, and insecurity begin to seep into the spaces where love used to live. And for a moment, as the cold wind from the open window brushed against my face, I wondered whether I had done the right thing. Not in showing up, not in revealing the truth, but in leaving her there, alone, broken, surrounded by people who were never going to love her the way I did, and there was a heaviness in my chest that felt like grief. Not for the wedding, not for the spectacle, but for the years lost to a misunderstanding neither of us ever addressed.
Dad,
the years
please don't
where she
go.
grew up thinking
And those
money
words,
made me small.
those quiet,
when the truth,
desperate
was that
words
love hat finally carried the weight of the love she forgot she had, and I paused, not turning around, because I knew if I saw her face I might break too, and in that low, dark voice of mine I said, "Jennifer, love built this family, not money." And then I stepped into the helicopter, leaving the wreckage of her choices behind, not as punishment, not as revenge, but as a mirror she would have to face long after the dust settled. And as we lifted into the sky, the vineyard shrinking below, I realized that sometimes life forces us to walk through darkness, not to destroy us, but to reveal the truth about the people we've poured ourselves into. And though the ache never fully leaves, neither does the clarity, and in that clarity, I finally understood that love cannot survive where shame lives. And that was the day I stopped chasing people who were only running from their own reflection, and began, for the first time in years, to choose peace over pain. And yet, as the helicopter carried me farther from the vineyard, from the ruined wedding and the shattered illusions scattered across its manicured lawns, I found myself staring out at the vast stretch of landscape beneath us, thinking about how fragile the bond between parent and child can be, how quickly it can be fractured when pride, ego, and insecurity begin to seep into the spaces where love used to live. And for a moment, as the cold wind from the open window brushed against my face, I wondered whether I had done the right thing. Not in showing up, not in revealing the truth, but in leaving her there, alone, broken, surrounded by people who were never going to love her the way I did, and there was a heaviness in my chest that felt like grief. Not for the wedding, not for the spectacle, but for the years lost to a misunderstanding neither of us ever addressed. The years where she grew up thinking money made me small, when the truth was that love had made me. And maybe I was too quiet about my sacrifices. Maybe I hid my struggles too well because I didn't want her to carry the burden of them. Maybe in trying to protect her from the ugliness of poverty, I accidentally taught her to look down on it, and that realization stung more deeply than any insult she had thrown my way. And as the city lights came into view below us, little constellations blinking in the dusk, I knew that healing this wound would require more than apologies, more than explanations. It would require time, patience, boundaries, and a willingness for both of us to confront who we had become, not just who we remembered each other to be. And when the helicopter finally touched down on the rooftop of my old friend's building, I thanked him quietly, my voice barely rising above the hum of the blades, and as I stepped onto the concrete, a numbness washed over me, the kind that comes after a long cry you never let yourself express, and I walked down the stairwell. Slowly, one hand trailing along the cool metal railing as if grounding myself back into a life that felt heavier and lonelier than it had just hours before, and as I reached the street, the world moving around me as if nothing monumental had happened, I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket, and when I pulled it out, I saw her name on the screen, Jennifer, calling, again and again. the missed call list filling faster than I could read it. And though part of me wanted to answer, to hear her voice, to soothe the pain I knew she was drowning in, another part of me held the phone still in my hand, frozen, because love without respect is hollow, and I wasn't ready to return to a dynamic where my worth was measured by her convenience. And so I let the phone ring until it stopped, and the silence that followed felt like a curtain falling on the end of a long, tragic play. And over the next few hours, as I returned home, sat on the edge of my bed, year-old and stared at the beside my photo of her 6, her missing tooth smile beaming with unconditional love. I felt something shift inside me, not anger, not bitterness, but a deep, quiet resolve to protect my heart as fiercely as I once protected hers, because somewhere along the way I had forgotten that my feelings mattered too, that my love deserved to be met with gratitude, not entitlement. And as the night deepened and the sirens outside faded into distant echoes, I replayed the moment she said, "Dad, you're embarrassing me," over and over, each repetition peeling back another layer of truth about how far apart we had drifted, and I realized that the embarrassment she felt wasn't about me. It was about the parts of herself she hadn't yet learned to confront, the parts she hid behind expensive weddings and curated guest lists, the parts that feared she wasn't enough unless the world validated her with applause and approval. And I knew then that she wasn't rejecting me. She was rejecting the reflection of her own insecurities, because I represented a past she wanted to erase, a past filled with hardship and imperfection, a past that reminded her she wasn't born into the wealth she now idolized. And as much as that hurt, it also softened something in me. Reminder that we all carry wounds we don't know how to speak about, and maybe hers had simply grown into something too tangled for her to understand. And so I lay back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady rhythm of my own breath, and thought about the long road ahead, the inevitable confrontation, the apologies that would feel too late, and the conversations that would feel too raw, but also the possibility, however faint, that this disaster, this implosion of her wedding day, might be the catalyst that finally forced her to rebuild her values from the ground up, to rediscover the humility and empathy she had lost along the way. Because sometimes life doesn't teach lessons
during that
gently.
time, I found
Sometimes
myself
it shatters
revisiting
the
old memories.
worldview, sorting through boxes of her childhood drawings, school projects, birthday cards she had once written in uneven crayon letters promising she would love me forever, and each memory felt like a ghost brushing past my shoulders, reminding me that the girl she used to be still existed somewhere beneath the layers of insecurity and societal pressure she had wrapped around herself. And slowly, something inside me began to thaw, not enough to forget, but enough to forgive in small, fragile pieces. And just when I wondered if she would ever reach out with words instead of missed calls, I received a letter, not a text, not an email, but an actual handwritten letter slipped beneath my door, her handwriting shaky and uneven, the ink smudged at the edges as if tears had fallen onto the page before it dried. And in that letter, she wrote about fear. Fear of disappointing people. Fear of not fitting into a world she had fought so hard to climb into. Fear of being judged for the kind of childhood she came from. Fear of not being enough for the man she was about to marry. And she confessed, quietly, painfully, that excluding me wasn't really about me. It was about her own shame, her own fractured sense of worth. And she wrote that the moment she saw me step out of that helicopter, something in her broke. Because she realized for the first time that the man she had been ashamed of was the only one who had ever stood for her without looking With my around thumb, to see who was watching. feeling the vulnerability And as I etched in
traced
every line,
word,
I felt that heavy, dark ache inside me shift again, loosening its grip just enough for compassion to seep through. And though the wound wasn't healed, not by a long shot, there was a flicker of hope, a fragile, trembling hope that maybe this fracture, this catastrophic wedding day collapse, had cracked her open just enough for her to finally confront the truth about who she was and who she wanted to become. And as I folded the letter, carefully placing it beside the picture on my nightstand, I whispered to the empty room, "We'll talk soon, Jenny." And for the first time in a long time, those words didn't hurt. They felt like a beginning. I stared at that empty chair, my chair, longer than I should have. Maybe because it wasn't just an empty seat at a table. It was an empty place in my daughter's life. A place I used to fill. A place I thought I earned through every sacrifice, every late-night shift, every skipped meal, so she could eat. It was a void carved out with surgical precision and covered with expensive flowers to hide the ugliness underneath. I finally sat, mostly because my legs were starting to feel weak. My hand trembled as I reached for the glass of water, but I didn't drink it. My throat felt like it had closed entirely. All I could think about was how we got here. And the truth? It wasn't overnight. It wasn't sudden. It was slow. Little signs. Little moments where Jennifer pulled away. Like the first time she didn't invite me to a school event because she thought I'd look out of place. Or when she introduced her stepfather as dad to her friends and didn't bother correcting them. Or the day I brought her used textbooks because she couldn't afford new ones, and she told me not to bring those to campus. I sat at that table surrounded by strangers. Those moments replayed in my mind like a montage of talking about investment portfolios and private yoga instructors, while I silently tried to remember the last time Jennifer hugged me without looking over her shoulder to see who was watching. Then suddenly, a shadow fell over the table. I looked up, and there she was. Jennifer. My daughter. My little girl who used to hold my hand, crossing the street. The same girl who used to cry when I left for night shifts. The one who once said, "Daddy, when I grow up, I'm gonna buy you a big house with a garden so you don't have to work anymore." Except now she stood in front of me like I was a stranger who had wandered into the wrong venue. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She didn't seem surprised. Just annoyed. "Dad," she said, folding her arms. "What are you doing here?" There it was. "No, I missed you. No, I can't believe you came."
No sofnis.
Just the cold, sharp edge of embarrassment. I swallowed.
Hard.
Well, I managed. "You're my daughter. I wanted to be here on your big day." Her eyes flicked to the helicopter outside. People were still staring at it. Some were taking pictures. She clenched her jaw. "You're causing a scene."
Me.
The man she excluded. The man she abandoned. "I'm causing a scene?" I whispered. Jennifer sighed like I was a burden she'd been forced to carry one last time. "Dad, this wedding is important. Very important. Everyone here is connected. Influential. These people are my husband's world. His family's world. And I worked really hard to fit in." "And I don't fit in," I said.
She didn't argue. Didn't deny it.
Didn't even pretend to soften the blow. She simply said, "Dad, you should go home." Something inside me cracked. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a quiet, devastating fracture. But before I could respond, her fiancé's mother, an elegant woman with a face that had clearly met more Botox for nearby guests to hear. "Jennifer, darling, if you needed help keeping certain people away, you should have told us. We have staff for that." I felt heat rise in my face. People were pretending not to listen while listening very closely. Jennifer didn't defend me. She didn't even flinch. She let them humiliate me. Right there. In front of 200 people. Then she whispered, "Please don't make this harder than it already is." That was the moment something shifted inside me. The pain turned into something else. Something harder.
Clearer.
Sharper. I stood slowly, pushed the chair back, and said quietly, "All right, Jennifer. If you don't want me here, then I won't stay." She sighed with relief. Relief. But then I added, "However, before I leave, there's something you should hear. Something everyone here should hear." Her eyes widened. "Dad, please." But it was too late. I walked toward the front of the hall. Every step felt like walking through fire, but also like shedding chains. People turned. Music softened. Whispers spread. And then, I picked up the microphone. Jennifer's face went pale. "Stop," she mouthed. But I didn't. I started speaking.
Calm.
Steady. Controlled. "Hello, everyone. My name is Michael. I'm the father of the bride, though apparently not important enough to be on the guest list." A ripple spread through the hall. I continued. "I raised Jennifer on my own for most of her childhood. I worked 3 jobs at one point. I sold my truck to pay her college fees. I went without meals so she could eat. I slept in my workshop for 2 years after her mother left because rent was too high. Everything I had, I gave to her. People stared at Jennifer. A few gasps. A couple of whispers. But today, I said, my daughter told me I don't fit in. That I embarrass her. Jennifer stepped forward. Dad, stop. I lifted a hand. I realized something. And I would have. Silence. I really would have. She's not ashamed of my financial status. Quietly.
I paused. She's ashamed of me.
The father who broke himself to build her a future. A stunned hush blanketed the room. But here's what Jennifer didn't tell you, I said. She froze. Her fiancé turned toward her slowly. Everyone leaned in. Jennifer didn't pay for this wedding. Her face drained of color. I did. Gasps erupted. Her fiancé's parents looked like statues carved from disgust and betrayal. I continued.
Yes.
Every flower arrangement, every decoration, every rented chandelier, every chair draped in silk. She didn't pay a dime. She came to me months ago crying, saying she couldn't afford her dream wedding. She said she wanted me to walk her down the aisle, that she needed me. So I paid. I looked at her fiancé. $68,000. That's what I spent. The room exploded with whispers. Then I added the final blow. And last week, she told me not to come. Jennifer's fiancé shook his head slowly, stepping away from her. His mother snapped. Is this true? Jennifer? Answer. Jennifer tried to speak, but choked on her words. I simply said, I'll let you all decide what kind of person I am. But now you know what kind of person she is. The groom's father slammed his hand on the table. This wedding is OFF.
Chaos.
Screaming.
Crying.
People standing, yelling, rushing, arguing. Jennifer collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. I placed the microphone down gently, walked past the sea of shocked faces, and headed toward the exit. 15 minutes later, the wedding was canceled. Completely. My helicopter pilot opened the door for me. As I climbed in, I looked back once. Jennifer stood at the doorway, mascara streaked, dress wrinkled, a devastated silhouette against the chaos behind her. For a moment, I almost went back. Almost. But then I remembered her words. You should go home.
So I did.
And for the first time in years, home felt like peace. The helicopter blades roared to life, wind whipping across the ruined wedding grounds. As we lifted off, the venue grew smaller beneath me. The shattered dream, the tangled mess of consequences, the explosion of truth they all tried so hard to bury. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel ashamed. I didn't feel like an outsider in my own daughter's world. I felt seen, even if just for a moment. The pilot glanced back at me. Rough day, he asked through the headset. I gave a small, tired laugh. You could say that. And then the world shrank beneath the clouds, and all the noise, the shouting, the accusations, the chaos, faded into silence. Up there, above the world, I finally had space to think. Was I proud of what I did?
No.
Was I ashamed of it? Not anymore. I didn't expose her to hurt her. I exposed her because she needed the truth as badly as I needed the closure. You see, there's a special kind of heartbreak that only a parent can feel. A heartbreak that comes from loving someone so deeply that you're willing to break yourself to keep their world intact, only for them to grow up and pretend you never existed. And still, somehow you keep loving them. That's the curse and the blessing of being a parent.
But that day something changed.
I realized that being a father doesn't mean being an emotional punching bag. It doesn't mean funding someone's dreams while they cut you out of the picture. It doesn't mean letting yourself be erased so they can fit into someone else's world. Love without boundaries becomes self-destruction. And I had reached my limit. When I got home that evening, the sun was just beginning to set. My little old house, the same one I'd almost lost a dozen times, looked unusually peaceful.
Quiet. Safe. Honest.
I sat on the porch, listening to the crickets, watching the sky turn orange and purple. My phone buzzed every few minutes, from relatives
Calls,
I hadn't heard from in
voicemails,
years,
texts,
from people at the wedding, from neighbors who'd somehow heard through the grapevine.
Most of them said something like,
You did the right thing. She had it coming. I wish someone had defended themselves like that for me. But one voicemail stood out. It was from Jennifer. Her voice was broken.
Soft.
Almost childlike again. Dad.
I'm sorry.
I didn't know how far I'd gone. I didn't know how much I hurt you. I thought I had to be someone else to fit in with his family. I thought you being simple or humble or not rich would make me look bad. I forgot who made me who I am. I'm so sorry. Please call me. Please. I didn't cry. I just closed my eyes and let the wind brush against my face. Sometimes life teaches lessons the hard way. Sometimes people don't wake up until everything around them falls apart. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away long enough for them to see the truth. Not out of spite, not out of revenge, but so they can rebuild themselves with honesty instead of image. I didn't know what future Jennifer and I would have. I didn't know if she would change, or if she said those words out of shock, or regret, or fear of losing everything. But I knew one thing. For the first time in years,
She saw me.
not as an embarrassment, not as a burden, not as someone to hide, but as the father who loved her enough to tell the truth in a room full of lies. And maybe, just maybe, that would be the beginning of something real again. Did I end life? The people we sacrifice the most for are often the ones who forget the fastest. But there's a difference between unconditional love and unconditional permission. Respect isn't bought. It isn't earned by money or status or appearances. It's earned by character. And if someone, even your own child, forgets that, sometimes
Even
the
if it
most
hurts,
powerful
if
thing
the
you
story
can do
hit you right in
is
the heart.
remind them or made you feel something real. Go ahead and smash that like button, subscribe for more emotionally charged stories like this, and tell me in the comments, what's the hardest lesson you've ever had to teach someone you loved? I read every single one. Until next time, stay strong, stay honest, and stay true to yourself.